Trails just flat up.
Hi. Today we have an extraordinary show in store for you. The celebrated odyssey of Jane Goodall and her amazing work with chimpanzees in Africa.
We also cover the life story of Jane's favorite photographer, Nick Nichols, whose photos on animals earned him the reputation as being one of the finest nature photographers in the world.
It did seem for a time as though it would fail just because the chimps were so shy. But then suddenly one individual, one very special chimpanzee, David Greybeard, he suddenly realized I wasn't frightening. And instead of running off, he would sit and watch. And so his companions, ready to run, well, she isn't so frightening after all.
This was the initial breakthrough for Jane Goodall, the first woman to travel to Africa to study the behavior of chimpanzees. From this point on, the chimps gradually began to trust her and accept her as a friend. We'll look at the astonishing steps it took to achieve this bond later in the show. But first, let's meet Nick Nichols, Jane Goodall's photographer, and an expert in the art of photographing nature and wildlife subjects.
For a long time, I was called the Indiana Jones of photography and an adventure photographer because I did dangerous things like going in caves and climbing mountains and rafting rivers. But it was really about going someplace maybe that so many people hadn't seen before. And my interest in the environment really grew out of that. And when I started working with endangered species and cultures and stuff, that's what's been my focus for the last 10 years. Since I've gotten so involved with nature, you know, nature needs an evangelist. You know, needs lots of evangelists.
For Nick, photography is more than just a hobby or a form of expression. It's a powerful weapon in the service of preserving nature. Nick first got involved in photographing animals in 1980, when the massacre of gorillas in Rwanda attracted worldwide attention. He proposed an article on the subject to the magazine Geo and traveled to Africa to cover the event.
That's the moment where I saw a camera could speak really loudly and make changes, and you could do things with the camera that would make a difference. But as soon as I started working with endangered species, I felt like I had a cause. You know, an endangered species can be saved by public attention, then I'm going to do that for the rest of my life. That's what I'm going to do. Once you have something like that, life is complete. You feel like you're doing something important.
Nick has had his photographs published in magazines all over the globe. He's a frequent contributor to the National Geographic, and on average, he'll shoot 1,800 rolls of film with 36 shots per roll for a single story. That's over 64,000 images. In the final article, no more than 30 stills are actually used.
It's not that all those pictures are thrown away, and not that they're bad technically, they just don't have any character. You have to just, especially with tigers, it was so hard to get to the essence of it.
But what is the essence? What makes a photo special? According to Nick, a combination of talent, technique, and luck.
There's a picture of Jane where a chimp is touching her hair. And it's a captive chimp, but he's in a zoo in Africa. And 5 minutes before that, he had been throwing feces and screaming and just ripping things apart. And no one in their right mind would go near this guy. And I was photographing another chimp that we were there to see in front of me. And I looked over my shoulder, and Jane had offered her hair to this crazy male chimp. But she had done it in a way with body language to tell him, oh, I'm your friend, I'm your mom, because she knows all about them. and he calmed completely down. And the picture is him reaching out and feeling of their blonde hair, and the sunlight is perfect behind. That's one of those fantastic moments. But it wasn't perfect at first. When I first saw it, there was a kid standing over there, and it was things messing it up. And so I just started moving, but as I was moving, I was sort of praying at the same time, talking. I get very religious in moments like that. So I started walking and tightening the frame until it was just Jane's head and the chimp's hand. And there's 30 years of work in one photograph. Jane Goodall's whole life is summed up in that photograph, that she has bridged the gap between apes and humans.
Another favorite shot of Nick's was taken in Ndoki, a rare region of the Congo, which remains as one of the last natural sanctuaries unspoiled by man.
And the one in the Ndoki of the elephant that's charging and screaming, that just sums up wilderness. It's not about an elephant, it's about nature and the whole wild world out there.
The photo wound up on the cover of a magazine, but his encounter with the elephant was a frightful experience.
That happened at dawn. I got up out of bed and went. I knew the elephants hang out in that river, and I walked down there, and the elephant's smelling me. She can't see me. She's charging at my smell. On that particular time, I ended up surrounded by angry elephants, and I felt like I was really in trouble. There's been a lot of times where I felt like this has gone bad. Things are not going well here.
Danger is a constant in Nick's professional career, but contrary to what you may think, it isn't the tigers, gorillas, and elephants that pose the greatest threat. Nick has lost count as to how many times he's almost died from a tropical disease like malaria or typhus.
I was in Liberia in a hospital, and Jane Goodall's son was with me. And I felt like slipping away in the darkness, just like you hear about death. And they gave me this injection that they've been resisting giving me because it's a very dangerous drug. And I came back like that. It was literally, as it went in my veins, the cure just swept through me and I started coming back. But I think I was pretty close to death.
Nevertheless, the average photographer can't resist the glamour and excitement of his profession, and he ignores the perils involved. Beside physical stamina, the job also requires lots of patience.
That's the hardest part about doing what we call wildlife photography, because if it's a wild animal, it doesn't want to be seen. In the Ndoki in the Congo, I sat in a tree 21 days. Every day from dawn till dark, I would sit there. And I read every bad book that I had, and I played Nintendo, the little game, hand game. You know, you're just waiting for gorillas to come out in front of your camera. And with tigers, I had to sit hidden, like in a little, it's called a hide, and it's just got a little hole in it, and the camera can see out. And you just sit there, and it's 120 degrees. And wait for a tiger to come along. It sounds so stupid. I mean, in 16 days, 5 minutes of tigers. And most of them after dark when I couldn't even see where the tiger was.
We asked Nick, of all the animals he's photographed, which one was his favorite? He answered, other than the chimps with Jane Goodall, the gorillas in Rwanda were his first choice.
But my dog there is named after Ziz, this gorilla that used to seem to protect me from the other gorillas, because his brother used to try to pick on me. One time he threw me down a hill and I broke a camera, and he would pound me on the back and things. And this gorilla would always protect me, because I think I was there every day. And I think after a while he says, well, he must be part of my package. I'm supposed to protect all of this, so this thing. And he always seemed to take care of me.
Nick used his fascinating experiences with gorillas, now an endangered species, to write a book on the subject.
I had read a lot of newspaper reports that the gorillas were being killed and were disappearing. And when Diane Fossey was murdered, I felt like I should do a book to explain everything. Not about her murder, but about the gorillas themselves. There were plenty of books written about her.
That book caught the attention of Jane Goodall. She invited him to shoot photos of her and her chimps, which led to another book written by Jane and photographed by Nick.
And this man introduced me to Jane to photograph her. And that was just the first contact, and I was very nervous as this famous person. And Jane said, well, I think my son should go to West Africa with you. It's going to be very difficult to travel there. Because we were trying to show the illegal side of the chimp trade, so it was a kind of an undercover story.
This book became quite controversial. and it covered some of the atrocities perpetrated by the scientific community through the space program in their experiments with chimps.
They'd cut their tops of their heads off and put probes in and stuff, smash them into walls to see how many gravity force they could take, because they wanted to see what would happen to a man if he went into space. So the chimp is, oh yeah, well, we'll use that. You could never do that today, because the animal rights movement is too strong. So next year we're going to have a book called Brutal Kinship. I'm the photographic author and Jane is the text author. So it was very hard to get published because it's not something that most people will buy. It's got some pretty hard photographs in it.
Like all good photographers, Nick has his own personal style. He pioneered the use of the flash combined with natural light, but there's another characteristic to his pictures.
I use a lot of movement. And they're not tricks for me. It goes back to being a fine artist. I never was satisfied with the still nature of still photography. It just sits there. So I like to have pictures that feel like they're moving. And I think that's my signature.
We continue our show with a comprehensive analysis of Jane Goodall's 30-year career of hard and persistent work to become the chimpanzee's best friend. The serene eyes of Jane Goodall don't betray in the least the pressure of her work in Tanzania, Africa, with the animals she considers the most charismatic and intelligent of all, the chimpanzees.
When I first got to Gombe National Park in 1960, the chimpanzees were so scared they ran away, and they kept on running away. And I was really afraid that the little piece of money we had for me to start the studies would finish before I'd found out anything exciting.
Before her research, very little was known about the chimp. To realize her life's dream, Jane was able to borrow money for her trip to Tanzania to do something nobody had ever attempted before. At the beginning, it was tough. Her money was running out, and she almost gave up. But gradually, she overcame the obstacles. We asked Jane why she decided to pursue this unusual line of work.
When I was a tiny little girl, I loved animals, and even though I was in the city in London in England, I spent as much time as I could watching animals. Then I began reading books, and one of the books I really fell in love with was Tarzan of the Apes. And so when I was 11 years old, I knew that when I grew up, I would go to Africa, live with animals, and write books about them.
On one particular occasion, while observing a chimp from behind foliage, Jane witnessed a fascinating sight.
I looked through, and there was a chimpanzee picking a piece of grass and using it to fish for termites. So he would put it down the hole and eat the termites off. And then sometimes he would pick a leafy twig and strip away the leaves, which was the beginning of tool making.
So how did Jane finally communicate with the chimps?
It did seem for a time as though it would fail just because the chimps were so shy. But then suddenly one individual, one very special chimpanzee, David Greybeard, he suddenly realized I wasn't frightening. Instead of running off, he would sit and watch. And so his companions, ready to run, well, she isn't so frightening after all. And so they stayed as well. And that really was, it was a major breakthrough. And then I began to realize they all looked different. They all had their own individualities and personalities.
Knowing she had very limited financial resources, we asked Jane how she survived the elements.
I ate the piece of bread in the morning, and my supper at night. I didn't eat anything in between. I sometimes drank from the streams. And protection, I just prayed. The only thing I was really frightened of was leopards, and there were not many leopards, and normally they don't attack.
Jane's discovery that a chimp is not the gentle vegetarian we had thought, but a formidable predator astounded the scientific world. Here are scenes showing a young baboon captured and killed by a group of chimps who feast on it. But despite their violent tendencies, chimps like to show affection. Contrary to common belief, they don't carry fleas. And physical contact, for its own sake, seems to be their primary objective.
So if two chimps have been apart and they meet and they're friendly, because they're not all friendly, then they kiss embrace, hold hands, pat one another on the back. And so I gradually began to learn about the way they communicate with each other, all the postures and gestures, and so many were like ours.
The younger ones engage in more strenuous activities. 5 years later, Jane Goodall earned her PhD in ethology, the science of applied ethics, from Cambridge University in England. She returned to Tanzania, now the proud possessor of a grant from the National Geographic Society to continue her research. British tradition didn't stop her from giving names to her chimpanzees.
At the time, it was considered more appropriate to give them numbers. But I mean, I wouldn't even remember the numbers in any way. That's stupid. I knew it was stupid. So I named them all and described their personalities.
Jane had a strong reason to identify the chimps by name. She regarded their genetic makeup to be almost the same as ours.
The structure of the chimp's brain and central nervous system is more like ours than that of any other living creature. They have the similar composition of blood. The immune system is very much the same. And so it shouldn't surprise us to find that, therefore, the way the chimpanzee uses his brain, the way he can solve problems and plan for the future to some extent, is very much like ours.
According to Jane, basic human emotions are equally prevalent in chimpanzees.
They can show emotions like joy and sadness and excitement and fear and despair. They can die of grief. They can show true altruism, helping others in their times of need. So in all these ways, they're so like us.
Despite her ragged ears and bulbous nose, old Flo was the matriarch of the group. She also took care of Flint, Fifi's younger brother. Fifi is the only chimp from Jane's group to have survived. Fifi tried to take Flint away from Flo, but to no avail. If Flo showed Flint too much love, she would eventually get the message and walk off, leaving Fifi confused and frustrated.
What I found, and of course this was the result of the long-term research, was that these very strong bonds grow up between mothers and their sons and mothers and their daughters. And it's now become apparent that the type of mother you have and the type of early experience you have does play a very, very important role in the sort of adult you will be. So if you have a really good mother, if you're a young male, then you are likely, if she's supportive and she's affectionate and she's playful and she also is quite high-ranking herself, then you have a very good start, and that helps you as you fight your way up the male hierarchy, because some males have this huge drive to get to the top. If you're a daughter, it's almost more important, because if you're a daughter with a low-ranking, timid mother, there is almost no way that you can be anything other than low-ranking and timid yourself.
One of the fondest memories that Jane cherishes was the time that Flo let Flint go up to her and touch her. The first time that a wild chimpanzee mother allowed her infant to reach out and touch a human being. When Flint got older, Jane tried an experiment with him to see how he reacted to something new. Chimps are intensely curious, but often afraid of the unfamiliar. Later, Jane put out a mirror with amusing results. This film was made 30 years ago, and the perennial question remains: if we're so much like chimpanzees, what is the essential difference?
And I think it's language that enabled cultural evolution to take off in our own species. It's begun in the chimps. Chimps have different tool-using behaviors in different parts of Africa, which are passed from one generation to the next through observation and imitation. But with language, you can expand that. And I think that's what's led to this huge gap between intellectual performance in chimp and in human. Now, why we did is a question that occupies people concerned with human evolution.
And why haven't they?
Well, I have one explanation which I believe is as good as any other. We walk upright and we have no hair, which is different from the chimps. And if I try and imagine a chimpanzee female who suddenly lost all her hair, she would walk upright to carry her baby, which might explain upright walking in humans. And in addition, she might sometimes have to put the baby down, because chimp babies cling to their mother with her hair. And if the baby could no longer cling, suddenly, for the very first time, between a mother and her small infant, there would be a need for another new kind of communication, which is normally done through the body. So maybe that led to the first little sounds, deliberate production of sound between mother and her child.
Cognizant of the chimp's intelligence, we asked Jane to express her thoughts as to what she has learned from the chimps that could provide a clue for human behavior.
I thought, yes, chimps are very like humans, but they're nicer. And then I found, no, when the situation arises, they can be just as brutal as us. So a lot of people use this information to hypothesize that because our closest relatives show this brutal behavior, that therefore our own aggression is so deeply rooted in our ancient primate history that warfare is inevitable, and that we're doomed always because of our genes to be aggressive and to fight. And I just don't believe that, because I think that more than any other creature living in the world today, we do have the power to control our genetic heritage. We don't have to obey our biological nature. We have a brain that has become far more sophisticated.
You know, that was a great show. Jane Goodall is an amazing human being. How old is she?
She's 66, and with her stamina and her brilliant mind, she's just as active as ever. It's really inspirational.
Well, what do you think we're doing here by presenting these shows? How much more inspirational can you get, right?
Touché. So until the next segment, we wish you well and so long.